Aaron, based on our initial discussion before the break, I'd like you to break it down, in terms of the message you have for a particular segment of our demographic segment of our population, namely the millennials and the Generation Zers. You talked about how unprecedented this situation is in terms of deficit, debt, and the fiscal framework. Nobody who's under 40 has ever experienced anything even close to this. So how do you, as an organization, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, how do you make sense of this for millennials and Gen Zers?
Well, first of all, just highlighting the fact that a lot of these young people are going to be the ones stuck paying the bills. If not them, then their children. So we're not just talking about the pandemic debt. We're talking about all the debt racked up until this point. And I think a lot of people find it troubling that, these are people who are just getting started out in life and they're already being saddled with this colossal debt on their shoulders. And these are obviously not the only challenges they're facing. We have a graying population, so there are fewer people going in the workforce. That's going to be more people, taking money out of the system and fewer paying in. And then, of course, the big elephant in the room that no one's able to deal with right now is the housing situation.
Right.
I mean, you have almost no hope if you're a millennial, unless you have a big inheritance or parents willing to help you. It's almost impossible to buy a house in major cities in this country. So it's a challenging time to be a younger person. But our message really is the sooner we get things under control fiscally, the less painful it will be for younger folks.
Yeah, and obviously this, as I keep stressing, this is a generational group that hasn't had to deal with anything close to this situation, or indeed their parents close to this situation in the past. So are you finding kind of willing ears for this? Is there starting to be an understanding or a reckoning that these kinds of things are unsustainable, or is it still a tough message that you've got to deliver?
It is starting, and I think obviously the pandemic's not over. So I think that the idea of cutting spending on certain things right now is a non-starter. People are still scared; they want reassurance, and spending money is one way that governments do that. But I do think there is a big difference between temporary measures and permanent ones, and that's where it's going to be interesting to see if this government does roll out permanent programs. I think they may be conflating acceptance for temporary spending that's for the pandemic with an acceptance of just spending forever on all sorts of other unrelated things. I don't think those are the same thing, and I'm not sure that the public is on board with the latter.
This is an important point because, as you said at the outset, let's face it, a lot of the focus still is on fighting COVID, getting your vaccination appointment, these very near-term issues for the public. I agree with you. That's where the public is focused right now. So again, I'm putting it out to you as a representative of your organization, the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. How do you have that dialogue with people, understanding that people are facing a very short-term crisis situation, but that there is going to be a need to talk about the longer-term picture? How do you settle that?
Well, I mean, one is to acknowledge, and it's unusual for us, right? Usually we're quite the skinflints when it comes to spending on anything. We understand it's an emergency, and so we're going to cut more slack, on program design, on things like waste. We don't think that means you have no accountability. We still think things like Parliament scrutinizing and governments explaining where things went wrong are important. But we just remind people that we'll do what we have to do right now, but there's going to come a reckoning. And I think most people accept that. I think most people are willing to borrow through an emergency. And again, they implicitly understand that, you had to borrow to save lives and save businesses. But at some point, we're going to have to find a way to pay for that. And that's going to be a challenging process.
Do you draw a comparison with their own situation, with their own household finances? Is that sort of something that people understand?
Yeah, I mean, the credit card analogy, I know it's not perfect and sometimes people don't like that I use it, but it's an easy way for people to understand. If you had a sudden household situation, a medical emergency or something, and you had to, borrow money, or you had to fly to a relative's funeral, a continent away, you had to borrow money to do it. You do it because you have to, but you also know that comes at a cost and there's interest and you have to pay it back. So I think the nature of the situation we're in people are more willing to borrow to survive, but they're going to be more willing to say, yeah, you know what, we're going to have to find a way to claw our way back.